Hey guys, we're your hosts. I'm Jess,
And I'm Fenella.
and this is Cozy Crime Club. Each episode, we explore real cases, from the eerie to the outrageous, with curiosity, empathy, and just the right amount of dark humour. So pour yourself a big mug of something warm, tea, coffee, or maybe something a little stronger, grab a blanket, and settle in. Welcome to the club. Welcome back.
Welcome indeed.
Vanilla, you're bringing us a case today. I think this
Yes,
might be maybe a familiar one.
this is a familiar one. We're back in Perth, Western
We
Australia.
can't get away.
Once again.
Just
We
love
can't.
it.
We should just move to Perth at this point.
Right?
Yeah, but this time we're actually revisiting a case that we already covered. A case from one of our previous episodes, the Phantom of Perth. Now, in that story, we explored the life and crimes of serial killer Eric Edgar Cook. Some of you might remember. If you don't, go catch up now. But this time, we're visiting the time period through a different lens. Not one filled with the fear of the unknown, but rather horror at how easy it can be to take the fall for another without ever intending to. Tonight, we're unpacking two of the most shocking miscarriages of justice in Australian history. Two young men, John Button and Darryl Beamish, wrongly convicted of murders committed by Eric Edgar Cook himself. This episode is about more than wrongful imprisonment. It's about how flawed trials, false confessions, and judicial stubbornness allowed injustice to prevail for decades. Perth in the late 1950s and the early 60s was a city under siege. Though people didn't fully realize it at the time, Eric Edgar Cook, later known as the Nightcrawler, the Netherlands Monster, the Phantom of Perth, was prowling the streets. He murdered 8 people, attempted to murder at least 14 more, and attacked dozens in ways that baffled police. Cook's crimes didn't follow a neat pattern. Sometimes he shot his victims, sometimes he stabbed or bludgeoned them, sometimes he ran them down with stolen cars. That unpredictability made him hard to catch. And it also meant that when innocent men like John Button and Darryl Beamish came under suspicion, the justice system latched on, ignoring the broader pattern. Let's start with John Button. In February 1963, John had just turned 19. That night in his home, he had an argument with his girlfriend, Rosemary Anderson. In the heat of the argument, Rosemary left to walk home, a distance of around 3 miles or 4.8 kilometers, leaving John to stew in the aftermath. John didn't stew for long. He soon followed after Rosemary in his car, hoping to resolve things, and at least drive her the rest of the way home, perhaps. She refused the resolution, though. And look, we've all been there, you know. You have a disagreement and you're just not quite ready to resolve things, patch it up, or, you just need that space. So I totally get it. She didn't want to get in the car. Now, John understood this as well, but even so, he did decide to follow her as she continued to walk home just to make sure that she actually arrived safely. At some point, Rosemary turned left and was out of John's sight briefly. He continued, thinking she'll come into view soon. But what he found instead was Rosemary on the ground to the side of the road. She had been struck by a vehicle and left fatally injured. John found her, badly hurt, and rushed to help. He carefully got her into his car, rushed her to a medical center, but Rosemary never woke again.
What timing? Like he was actually following her and doing like the right thing. I feel like a lot of people who have arguments don't even do that step. And he's like,
I know.
he's followed her and then literally just what a matter of moments. And then he finds her and that's horrendous.
It's horrifying. It's the thing that he was trying to prevent, He wanted to make sure she was safe, and then it only takes a second for things to go wrong. It's really scary.
You just can't even imagine the guilt. You'd probably not that you should have it, but I feel like you would feel some level of responsibility, and like I guess, and like I said, guilt is not what you should feel, but most likely is in the human condition, that's what you're going to feel.
Yeah, exactly. And I just feel as well, not that he should feel guilty or anything, but if it were me, I would be thinking as well, if I'd only convinced her to get in the car, you always have that feeling of there's something more you could have done. And
Yeah,
even though he was doing the right thing, there would be ways to kind of blame yourself or just be
absolutely.
frustrated with how things played out.
How
Very,
devastating.
very scary
Mm,
experience, I would think.
mm, mm-hmm.
John quickly became the prime suspect. Police interrogated him without a lawyer. John later described being physically assaulted by officers as well during questioning. And in that state, grieving, frightened, and exhausted, he confessed. The confession was the cornerstone of the prosecution's case. At trial, prosecutors argued that John had deliberately run down Rosemary in a fit of rage. The idea that someone else, a stranger prowling the streets, might have killed her seemed way too far-fetched to the jury. What the court didn't know was that Cook had attacked at least 7 other women using stolen cars, deliberately trying to run them down. And that information wasn't disclosed to them in Button's defense. To the jury, Rosemary's death looked like an isolated event. And so John was convicted of manslaughter and sentenced to 10 years. He served 5, though, before parole, but carried the stigma of guilt for almost 40 years. Years earlier, in 1959, another young man's life was turned upside down. Darryl Beamish was 18, deaf, and nonverbal. He was accused of murdering socialite Gillian Brewer, who was found dead in a Cottesloe flat. She had been brutally attacked in her bed with a tomahawk and a pair of scissors. Now, police claimed that Beamish confessed. They said he described stabbing her with scissors, wiping the blades on a sheet, and even pointing to where they were found in the flat. But the so-called confessions were riddled with problems. Beamish gave conflicting accounts about where he got the tomahawk and where he'd left it. He also gave conflicting accounts of how he reached Brewer's flat in the first place. But police interrogators guided him, sometimes asking leading questions, sometimes ignoring inconsistencies. And again, Darryl is deaf and mute. We know that in 1963, interrogators pressed John until he just about lost touch with reality. We can only imagine how Darryl may have felt, staring up at the faces of men who couldn't and wouldn't hear him, literally or figuratively. The confusion and frustration would have been immense. Regardless, interrogators continued.
I know it's an old case, so it's hard to find full details on it, I'm sure, but I just wonder if he was deaf and mute, how they even communicated with him during the interviews or interrogations.
I didn't come across that information, but they were doing written confessions with him.
I wonder if you could, if he knew sign language and if they had an interpreter there for him.
Yeah, they probably did. That makes sense that they would have done that.
You also said earlier he pointed to the location of where he left the weapons. Do you know if that was correct? Because I know you said there was inconsistencies in what he kind of said multiple things, or was forced into saying multiple things. However, it was. But do you know if he pointed out the correct spot? Like, did the prosecution have that on him to be like, oh, he pointed where it actually
Well,
was?
that's what they said. But again, it's difficult to know, really. It sounds like he was coerced into saying these things. They were asking leading questions. The leading question would be that they actually are giving him the information and then kind of interpreting his response to that. By all descriptions, it was not a fair. These questions weren't fair.
And I mean, you can understand that the police force in general and the public would really, really want that solved. That was a really gruesome murder. But also, that's just so not the right way to do it. Like, you don't want to accuse innocent people. You have to, have suspects and knock them off, but in the correct way. And, it's just really unfortunate when the urgency to want to solve it comes before, due processes.
Yeah, I mean, yes, you literally hit the nail on the head. That's exactly perfectly spoken. Yeah, that sums this up in a nutshell.
It's really disappointing, and you hope that doesn't happen from a justice system point of view. But,
Yeah.
at the end of the day, justice system is, even though it's written with laws, it's still led by people. And, those laws are still written and enacted by people. And as we all know, humans are fallible. So
Now I guess it's a little different. Not entirely. This can still happen, which is horrifying. But in the 60s and in the 50s, without things like CCTV, it would have been extremely hard because they literally have nothing concrete to go on. And, regardless of people's opinion on CCTV, I'm sure we all have one. But I mean, if you were in a situation like this, you might be kind of glad that you could say, well, just pull up the camera from that night. You'll see I wasn't on the street. It is so tragic that these things happen at all, but definitely in light of the fact that we know now that very likely this wouldn't have been able to happen just purely based on the fact that there would have been some kind of footage somewhere to place people where they were at the time. It's even more it's just miserable, this whole case.
I know. I was thinking of that as well, just the era that this happened. And it was really unfortunate for these two men in a way that they were in that time, because we even have these days, police will have, every interview room will have a camera and recording as well, which is really would have been really important in this case for a defense for him to be able to draw upon as well.
Yeah. Excellent point. Yes, 100%. It just makes me so much more sad in light of that as well. Just a different time, like you said. But things improve and there's always progress. So I guess moving forward, we have those things in place.
It's important that you're bringing it to us and telling us. But as devastating as it is, it leads the way for change. That's history. We got to learn from it.
So Darryl's so-called confession was set. At trial, prosecutors presented his coerced statement as solid proof of guilt. They also introduced evidence of other crimes Beamish had committed as proof of his criminal tendencies. Because, yes, Darryl Beamish wasn't exactly living on the straight and narrow. He had, in fact, molested young girls and committed a few break-ins himself. This made his case quite interesting to me because I was thinking, well, he should definitely be getting in trouble with the law, for sure, and potentially kept away maybe from society, but not in this context. Not for something he actually didn't do. So I kind of wrestled with that a little bit when I was researching. But the law should follow the facts. Now, this prejudicial strategy painted him as violent and deviant, swaying the jury. He was convicted of Brewer's murder in 1961, sentenced to death. His sentence was later commuted to life imprisonment. And actually, Beamish was paroled in 1971, which I also found interesting because initially he was sentenced to death. So that trajectory threw me for a loop. However, he did actually then go on to assault a young girl during that time. And so he landed himself back in prison. And by that point, I reckon that's probably a good outcome, even if we disagree with the path that got him there. Now, by 1963, police finally arrested Eric Edgar Cook. He confessed to dozens of crimes, including the murders of Rosemary Anderson and Gillian Brewer. Cook swore affidavits and even described details about the killings to Reverend Sullivan, a prison chaplain. He explained how he entered Brewer's flat through an open door, crawled out through a flap in the back door. He admitted he had run down Rosemary Anderson. But here's the twist. When those confessions came before the courts, they were dismissed. In Beamish's case, the Court of Criminal Appeal heard Cook's testimony in 1964, but called it obviously fabricated. Judges argued the case against Beamish was too strong to be overturned. For Button, Cook's confession wasn't enough either. The courts clung to the original verdicts, insisting that the convictions were sound. Cook himself was executed in October 1964. He went to the gallows, insisting he was guilty of the murders that Button and Beamish had been convicted of. His death silenced the one man who could directly exonerate them. Both men served years in prison. Button 5 years, Beamish 15, but release did not mean freedom. They lived under suspicion, branded killers by their own communities. Appeals after Cook's execution failed. Beamish's lawyers took his case all the way to the High Court, but all avenues were exhausted by the mid-1960s. It wasn't until decades later that the tide began to turn. In the 1990s, journalist Estelle Blackburn uncovered police files showing Cook's established pattern of vehicle attacks and assaults on sleeping women. Her book, Broken Lives, brought renewed attention to both cases. With new legal advocacy, John Button's conviction was finally overturned in 2002. The court recognized that Rosemary's death matched Cook's own methods, and Button's confession had been coerced. Darryl Beamish's exoneration came in 2005 after a record 6 appeals. Fresh forensic analysis and Cook's original confession were re-examined, and the court acknowledged the wrongful conviction. So, what happened by way of apology from the state? Well, both men received voluntary payment. Basically, this is generous of the courts or of the state to be paying anything out because they're not obligated to do so. Button received $460,000 and Beamish received $425,000. Neither man received an official apology from the Western Australian government. But no sum could compensate for decades lost, reputations destroyed, or the trauma of wrongful imprisonment. John later commented on this payment, saying, "There are many important changes that must be made to the justice system. Certainly, one of those is proper compensation. This must be through the courts, as in any compensation case where the victim has suffered due to negligence of others. There must also be an amount paid for the emotional pain and loss of freedom."
I mean, how do you put a price on that? There is no price.
Exactly.
And I suppose there's got to be a ceiling somewhere, but and I agree with what he's saying. Like, it's, I don't know. I just like, how do you even calculate that?
I guess it would be something that would need to be built into the court system, and I think that it would be a matter of how those outcomes impact people just to get a money value. If 5 of those offences are done to you, then you get all of that added up as a total, I suppose. And it might not be fair, but it would be more fair than they have no obligation to even do it. They just decide what sounds good, what do we think might make them go away and not talk about this problem, which is just not good.
It's such like a ripple effect, though, or a butterfly effect. You know what I mean? Like, you're like, well, what did that cause? How do you know the reaching effects of it? Like, because obviously they probably, like, there's some simple things where you'd say, oh, because they had the conviction that hadn't been overturned, maybe they lost just income earning opportunity. That could be just like a first thing. But there could be things where, you know, there's certain family members who, like, I personally believe that stress is like a huge impactor for illness and disease. And how do you know if like a family member or themselves were so put under so much stress and pressure that didn't impact other things? You know what I mean? It's just, I think that's a really hard, like, I agree with what you're saying of being able to have certain things like check. But I think some things are too hard to really understand or quantify. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I totally agree with that. And actually, you're saying some things that John himself said. He had some comments about this because he obviously had a lot of time to think about it. And he said the same thing. He was like, well, you know, we need to look at this is not a direct quote now, but just, you know, he did say we need to look at loss of income, earning opportunities, and also, you know, family impacts or life impacts.
Yeah, absolutely. How long did they live in purgatory? And
exactly,
because that kind of creates more things that they've missed out on. And I also think it's really hard, though. How do you put a price on a mental health and the impacts of that whole thing on you or people close to you? And even, like, I don't know, I just think it carries so much further. It's like, even the victim of the crime, their family are living their life going, oh yeah, they've been caught. And then all of a sudden to say, oh no, it's the wrong person, you know, that's a whole thing for them to deal with as well. But I think
Yeah.
it's hard to quantify it, but I think it's important to have these conversations, and for them to come up, and because you can never get to an end point without a discussion. So yeah.
Yeah. No, that's so true. The more you look into it, the more impacts I'm sure that you can find.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I did actually find an interview that John Button had given,
Mm-hmm.
and I thought we would just let him speak for himself here, so I'm just going to quote him directly. From the moment I found Rosemary's body in the sand, unconscious, my life changed forever, for the worse. In prison, I found the nights to be horrific. I paced the floor till the early hours of the morning, arguing with an imaginary jury and imaginary judge. I kept myself busy in the study to take my mind off the loss of my freedom. After my release, I found myself trying to pick up the pieces of my life, as though there was no time gap between going in and coming out of prison. I was to find that the life that I once had was gone for good. The friends and things I used to do were no longer there. From my conviction in 1963, the next 39 years of my life became a mission to prove my innocence. The hardest criticism to bear was that of Rosemary's parents, who accepted the police position of my guilt. Even after my exoneration, Mrs. Anderson stated, "You took her out that night and never brought her home, so it's your fault."
That destroyed my heart. That's so sad.
Yeah.
And I mean, I've never been in a position of the Anderson, family, and I hope to never be. But and like, how do you know how to think? But well, that's a lot of
It's
guilt to put
just,
on someone. I mean, it's through grief.
it is through grief, but I don't think that justifies saying something like that. To say you took her out that night and never brought her home, that's very pointed. I feel like that would have cut him so deeply.
Oh yeah.
Like, he would have just been like, oh my God.
I mean, he's probably
Anyway.
doing that to himself before
Well,
that.
yeah, definitely. Doesn't make it easier.
Mm.
That's for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, just that insight into what it was like and what it continued to be like for John Button makes things even more heartbreaking than they already were. His story especially, but also that of Darryl Beamish, are examples of times when the system fails people, not only because of their experience, trauma, and lost lives, but when the system fails in this way, it doesn't just impact those wrongfully convicted. It leaves the rest of the community vulnerable to future harm as the offender continues to quite literally get away with murder. So let us know in the comments what you think of Button and Beamish and their stories. There are so many threads to follow in this case, so many people affected by the actions that led to these outcomes. We'd love to know what others think and have found out about it all. But for now, the case is closed. Thank you for traveling through it with us. And we'll see you next week, same time, same place, for another story, another case.
Well, thanks for getting cozy with us today. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a review or share the club with a friend. You can join us on YouTube, Instagram, and Spotify, because here we leave the kettle on. Until next time, stay curious, stay kind, and stay cozy.